So back in our countries controller in the getCountries action, currently we are returning a list of countries. But we want to instead return the list of country DTO, which only has the ID and name of the country. So let's create a list of country DTO. So I'll create a variable. I'll call it countries DTO, and I'll initialize it to a blank list of type country DTO. Now we don't have an access to these yet because we just created them, but they are in projects.dtos folder. So that's where the namespace is going to be. And now we just need to populate this list with all countries that we got from the getCountries method, but we will simply only use the ID and name properties. So we can use a for each loop and loop through all the countries in our countries list. So let's do that. For each. And we'll go through all the countries, and inside with each iteration we will add a new country DTO object to the countries DTO list. So we'll do countries DTO dot add, and we want to add the new country DTO object, and in it we simply want to select the ID and the name. So our ID of the DTO object will equal whatever the ID in the countries list was. So country.id. And the name property of the DTO object will have a value from the countries list, country.name. And that's it. At the end of the loop, we will have a list of countries inside the countries DTO list, but only with the ID and name properties. So now, instead of the list of countries that we will return from the iAction, we will return the countries DTOs list. So let's build and test it. So I'll go back to Postman, and I'm going to run this again. And this time, we still get the list of countries alphabetically, but we do not have the authors. We only have the ID of the country and the name of the country. Alright, so our call works as expected, but what if it didn't? What would be actually returned? Well, what we can do here, back to our action, after we get the countries from the repository, we should check and make sure that we are getting actual result. Because if the result is invalid, we need to return something like bad request, rather than keep going and trying to construct a DTO object from countries list that is invalid. So I'm going here and I will do an if statement, and I will check if the model state is valid. The model state is part of the controller, and if anything is wrong with the result retrieved from the repository, the model state will be invalid. So if that's the case, if the model state is invalid, then we can return a bad request. And we can also return it with the model state, so it will display the actual error as well. So this way we won't proceed trying to create an object that cannot possibly be valid because the call was invalid itself. And remember, I told you that sometimes these values, if there's no countries, it will return null. Null is not invalid. It's a valid result. Invalid simply means that something went wrong. And finally, there's one more thing I want to do here, which is not necessary, but I like to do that, and that is to annotate the action with the response type that is expected. Now in this case we expect either 400, which is bad request, or OK, which is 200. So on the action I can add another annotation, and this one is produces response type. And like I said, this one produces either 400 if something goes wrong, or produces response type of type 200, which is OK. And with the response type here, with the OK type, I also want to specify what is being returned along with that type. And in this case, it's the list of countries DTO objects. So I'm going to specify a type, and type will equal type of IEnumerable of country DTO. And again, this is not necessary. I mean, it would return these types regardless of whether you specify it, but it's good for debugging and documentation because I can look at this action and know that, alright, I'm expecting these two types of responses only. So if I get something else, I know something's wrong, and it gives me something to look at when debugging. Alright, so now we have a list of all countries. Let me just run it one more time after I build it to make sure that nothing broke. If I run it again, I get the list of countries as expected. So this is running correctly, and also, by the way, notice that I'm also getting 200 OK as a status. So next, let's work on the action to retrieve a specific country.